Okay.
Hey.
Hey, so hey, it's Jenna with the Giano System, and I have Dr. Nicole Black, the maker of the Dissociative Experiences cards, on Zoom with me. And I'm doing the TikTok with the Zoom so that y'all can talk to her as well, since she doesn't have quite the number of followers to go live. But we'll have her in the chat and y'all could go follow her so she can get enough followers to go live. And let me see, I got my mirroring done right. It's so weird once it's mirrored, because then I don't know which way to put it so that it reads right. Okay, and we got some people coming in. Hey guys, we are doing a Q&A with the creator of the Dissociative Experiences cards that I've been doing on my channel. So I was just getting into, I've had several people ask me this week if it counts as being a system if they don't have, if their parts never front, if they're always the part that is in the front. So I'll throw that at you, because I've had that one come at me several times this week.
Yes, it does count as a system, I would say, but it would probably fall under the category of not being D.I.D. or dissociative identity disorder. We would more than likely consider that to be other specified dissociative disorder, which is another dissociative disorder or condition. It's just not quite to the magnitude of full D.I.D. Because other parts aren't taking executive control over the system, and there's probably not amnesia then if these other parts aren't taking over. But a lot of the times when people have those experiences, they will report hearing voices or feeling like there's a co-pilot that's helping them to get through things or do things. It's just that part doesn't take over executive control.
Yeah. RKNS asks, can alters be versions of your younger self?
Yes, they can be. They would, the way you distinguish, so they're in therapy, we have a concept called the inner child, and you would hear people talk about this in lots of different ways. Like I could talk about my inner child that gets excited when I see kittens or puppies or toys that I played with when I was a kid, but it's not an alter, okay? Because I don't have dissociative disorder or anything like that. It's just the young version, like the young spark in me still that loves to play with toys and kittens and puppies. But to be a real alter, associated with a dissociative disorder, it would need to be felt as separate or different from the person, from the main person. But yes, they can be younger versions of yourself. They may even be called like little Nicole or the little girl or things like that. That's totally common.
Yes. And we definitely have one that when, like I was like, what's your name? And she was like, I'm just me, like little me. Exactly.
Yeah. And they may say like, I'm me, and then, so, in therapy, we typically try not to differentiate if they aren't differentiated, because we tend to try not to cause more division or separation. That's not typically our goal. So then we might just say like the little girl or the little me instead of, going out of our way to find a name for this part or to make it even more separated than it already feels.
Yeah. And I think that's like this card, which is the I suddenly feel younger. Sometimes I even think my body changes in size and my surroundings seem bigger. I think when you get into like the dissociative disorders, like this is when those alters are present, or you're feeling their passive influence, that's a very common mood.
Let's see. So I might say this wrong. Hadia asked a question, why do memories feel so fuzzy and almost feel like I'm trying to remember a dream? That can be because if there was dissociation that was experienced at the time that those memories were being made. So let's say you're trying to remember memories from the age of 6 to 8. If you were dissociating, if there was a lot of bad stuff that was happening, or if you had a lot of dissociative symptoms, then trying to recall those memories can elicit the dissociative symptoms again, and they will often feel fuzzy or like they're a dream. A lot of the times people that have dissociative disorders question whether or not they were just dreaming or if they made it up in their mind, or if that really happened to me. It's very common for that to be an experience that people struggle with, and kind of questioning your own sanity because, I know that I remember this, but it feels like a dream. And a lot of the times there may be evidence or pictures or some sort of outside evidence that whatever was happening in life or that you did live at that place or things like that. So, and as things get worked out in therapy, that can become more clear.
Yeah.
Not that the therapist says anything or does anything, but working with the parts of the self or the alters that hold those memories, allow them to become more clear, and then they're not as fuzzy or dreamlike a lot of times.
Yeah, getting memories back for me was unexpected, because I expected that dissociated memories would all be trauma memories. And so when I was able to connect with parts who had like everyday memories, like just remember me like playing up in my room. And I was like, I didn't think that like this was repressed memory, but all of a sudden I was able to connect to my childhood self in a way that I had never been able to.
Yeah, it's the coolest, especially for like just the good memories,
Yeah.
Like it doesn't feel cool to be like, oh yeah, that sucked. But even what's really satisfying for me as a therapist is to help clients when they first come into counseling and they begin to work on these different coping skills or things like that. And then they quit having so many chunks of time missing from their present day life.
Yes.
So they're present and they're involved and they recall, or they may recall things from recent past that they had forgotten about. And it feels so good, to help people to be able to like get back to their lives and be present for the things that they want to be able to experience. Especially like when you've got kids and you want to be able to be involved and be present and watch them grow up. It's just a nice experience to help people achieve that. So
I think that's a really good lead in. One of the questions that I had a lot on let me find the card. There we go. So this was the big one, which is when I don't want to feel something, I can make myself feel nothing. So on this card, I had a lot of people say, but wait, isn't that a good thing? Like a lot of varieties of that. Like, why would I want to feel negative emotions if I don't have to? Or don't you want to be able to shut those down? Just a lot of varieties of that sort of response to that card.
Yeah, and in the short, it may seem like that's a good idea to have no unpleasant feelings. But unfortunately, like life sucks sometimes, bad things happen for no good reason. And we have to learn how to live through those things, how to survive through those things, and how to process through those things. And when you process through them, you may learn something from it, you may grow from it, you may get stronger from it. And if you don't, if you just compartmentalize it and put it in a box, then it's still held in its original power. And it sucks to have to work through something and to desensitize it and make it not bother you anymore, but it's worth it in the long run because it can't rear its ugly head when you least expect it and take you out, emotionally and put you down for the day and things like that. So it can be helpful, to be able to temporarily put your feelings away, like as a therapist. I have this insane ability to compartmentalize my own feelings because nobody wants their therapist crying harder than them or with maybe with them when they're telling their story, because then they're going to be like, no, I can't say anything because I'm going to make my therapist cry. Yeah. And nobody wants that. Right. So there are times that I'm like, Nicole, you better suck it up. And you hold it for later and you just act as if you have no emotions, and you have to be strong for your client in a sense. But it needs to be let out at some time. And so maybe that is the best survival mechanism in the moment. That's okay. But you got to process through it later. Yeah. And it's, yeah, sure. Most people can put away their emotions at some point in time, but people that have dissociative disorders, their experience is unique in that they do this automatically without trying. They do it when they don't even want to. And it really just kind of takes over their experience, and it can get kind of out of control past what they can manage a lot of times.
Yeah, that was, so I did a response like saying that, well, in a traumatic situation, even a neurotypical person, they're going to like their emotions will shut down because they'll enter fight, flight, or freeze. Was like, but what happens is when you get into then day-to-day life, you're no longer in that traumatic situation, but you're never able to experience the full arc of an emotion. You hit the intensity of it and your brain just says nope and nopes out of it. And then, like you said, that emotion's still there because it wasn't fully processed. My therapist said it was canned for freshness. Like it just opens up just as fresh as ever until you process it.
Yeah, and when you've got parts, if you, the host or whoever, cannot manage that emotion, then it gets compartmentalized in another part. And that part is suffering, a lot of times suffering with that emotion or that memory or that thing. And so we want to help all of the parts to get strong in whatever they need to get strong with, and to, when the time is right, gently process through whatever those things may be. But to develop the tolerance to handle those tough emotions is the key to starting any of that work.
Yes. I actually had, and it was revelational for me. because I had an alter that described themselves as the chamber pot of the system, because all the negative anything, they're like, I contain all the shit. And when I realized, like, by not feeling it and processing myself, like I was inflicting that on another part, it was, needless to say, it was very motivating for me to learn how to process that, because just because I wasn't feeling it myself, it was still there. Someone else was suffering.
And, you know, there may be folks out there that are not motivated to help other parts process that. But to that, I would say that those parts, they, like the information, the feelings, they can begin to leak out when we don't want it to. And so that kind of leaks out in, you know, crying or voices or snippets of memories or emotions that seem to come from nowhere, from out of the middle of the blue. There's a card for that one too. You want to show them that one?
Absolutely.
With the storm or the girl that's ironing.
Yes, I am.
And you may give a trigger warning to our folks out there.
Yeah, there are two versions of the card. So one is less triggering. The imagery is more symbolic, and yeah, the other one is more direct. So let me find. Here we go. So here is the more symbolic imagery for that. Oh wait, nope. I saw a cloud and it was the wrong one.
While you're doing that, my kitty smells like roses. Can you please clarify your question? I don't understand the full question.
So we have the one that is the symbolic image that says, I sometimes have strong feelings that come out of nowhere, but I don't know where they come from or why I feel the way I do. And trigger warning, the more direct one, so one that you might feel a little bit more image-wise. This one was a lot for me before I started therapy, started processing. And what I tell a lot of people are like, well, what if I just like ignore this? And I was like, you can't ignore your trauma or your alters. Like, it will just come out sideways. Like, it will still find a way out. And if they're experiencing alters, like I was like, they will find a way to get their needs met, but it will then probably be a maladaptive way. Like, you can't just ignore their needs. Because yeah, the storm is going to come through, whether you're wanting it to or not. And usually it will then come through at an inconvenient time because you didn't make time.
Yeah. Someone asked, can alters negatively comment on your decisions internally mostly? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Whenever they don't agree with them or they think that they've got a better idea. And what we do in therapy, what we try to strive for is working on internal cooperation and communication. And so if that's something that you're experiencing, then I would encourage being curious as much as you possibly can tolerate of, you know, why do you not like this decision? What does it mean for you? Or what do you want me to do? And being curious and compassionate, and trying to be understanding as you possibly can so that you can get some cooperation and communication going inside.
And we had someone just pop in and want to know who's on. So it's Jenna with the D.D.N.O system talking to Dr. Nicole Black, the creator of the Dissociative Experiences cards. And you might want to just put the Phoenix Arise TikTok in there for any newbies so that they can click on that. She doesn't have enough followers to join in the live yet because she's new to TikTok. So if you go follow Phoenix Arise Counseling, we can try and get her numbers up so that we can do a joint live, and then you can see her face. So yeah, that's who's on. Someone says, how do I work on dissociating so much and making my memories clear and feeling normal again? So basically, how do they work on not dissociating as much as they are? So, and then making their memories and feelings normal again.
Yeah, so this was a primary driving factor in creating these cards. And I created these cards they're based off of some assessments that therapists use to help us diagnose and determine if a person has a dissociative disorder. And they're very common experiences that people have. And people can have some of these experiences without having a dissociative disorder. Like, we all have the capacity to experience derealization or depersonalization, where you feel like things around you are not real, that maybe you're not real, like you feel detached from your body. That's a trauma response. And so anyone can have the capacity to have that experience in the moment of trauma. But what separates that from dissociative disorders is that people with dissociative disorders tend to have these dissociative experiences become automated, and they tend to not have control over them. And then there is what we would call dissociation of the personality, where the personality is divided or separated. And that can be to different degrees or different levels, all the way up to having amnesia between parts of the personality, which we find in D.I.D. And so the cards depict these different experiences. And one of the first steps that I like to help my clients with is to catch these moments where they have these dissociative experiences, and to begin to notice them, notice what's triggering them, and to begin to practice grounding skills and ways to bring them back into their body. So the deck of cards includes a grounding skills card, because I sure would hate to have people identify these symptoms and nothing to help them.
Yes.
And there's two decks, the realistic deck that can be a little overwhelming, and it may not be every card that's overwhelming. Sometimes it's just like a couple of cards for that person. And honestly, once you start to work through things in therapy, then those cards can become less triggering. But then there's the symbolic deck. But these cards are really great also for if you just wanted to use the symbolic deck for yourself. And then if you wanted to explain to a therapist who doesn't understand, or explain to a loved one what these dissociative experiences may look or feel like, then this will give them a better idea. Because a lot of times people have no concept of what that would even feel like.
And I think because we're not very familiarized with the language of dissociation, like that, these are invaluable to be like, oh, no, that, like, that's what I'm feeling. And it can be really validating to see a representation that you can say, oh, this is what I experience. And it can be difficult for the loved ones of somebody with trauma to relate. So I think this is a really powerful communication tool, and sometimes even self-communication, because just seeing it and you go, oh, that's what that is. For me, I was telling someone it's like the emotion wheels. When I first started therapy, I had an emotion wheel and I put it on my fridge so I could learn to identify my emotions and understand what I was feeling. And these are like the emotion wheel, but for dissociation, to be like, oh, that's the dissociative experience that I'm having right now. And
Yeah.
being able to recognize it, I can then like understand what I'm experiencing and help get through it. Our RKNS says there's a younger alter who wants to tell their therapist trauma that they don't know. And is that normal?
Oh, so there's a younger part that knows about a trauma that the host doesn't know about. And is that normal? Yes, that is normal, especially with, I would say with D.I.D, sometimes with O.S.D.D or other specified dissociative disorder, it's not uncommon for parts to hold on to trauma memories, basically because when we think about D.I.D, the host, or like the person, and they can't see me, but I'm doing air quotes. The person is, their job in the system is to just keep living as if everything's okay and to survive and just pretend like everything is fine. And oftentimes the host or the main part of the system is depleted and exhausted and has a hard time confronting difficult emotions and doesn't like getting angry and doesn't like getting sad and doesn't like confronting people, and can be pretty passive and avoidant of things. And then the parts hold on to the big stuff that it's the part's job to hold on to traumatic stuff, and it's the host's job to keep trucking along and pretending like all the engine lights aren't on. And so, yeah, it's not uncommon. I would say, though, it's not something that's being experienced, to talk about it with the therapist. And before parts start disclosing things in therapy, I always like to make sure that all parts are on board with this disclosure, because we don't want to jump the gun and one part starts spilling all the secrets and other parts are definitely not okay with it. It's going to create conflict inside.
Now, I've had 2 people ask where they can get the cards. And if you go ahead and add your name in there so that they can follow Phoenix Arise Counseling on TikTok. But these I got on the Phoenix Arise shop on Etsy. And where else? Like, is there somewhere else that they can buy those?
It's also on my website, my counseling website, but I did drop the Etsy in there. Honestly, the Etsy is probably the easiest, but I will drop my regular website address for my practice.
And that was my exact question. Like, my therapist used these in counseling, and I was like, I need those. Like, I got in my car and was Googling how I could get a hold of those. So that's how all this came about, because I was like, I need that in my life, and then was using it on TikTok to do exactly this, communicate dissociation.
Someone asked, can relationship trauma such as highly emotional arguments, etc., also cause these feelings? Yes, they definitely can. However, when we think about a dissociative disorder, the dissociative disorders, it's typically agreed upon in the mental health field that dissociative disorders start by the time the person is about 6 or 7, 8 years old. Now that can be a little bit younger, it can be a little bit older, but this is something that starts in childhood. And unfortunately, it just gets reinforced and reinforced. But yes, emotional trauma can definitely cause these symptoms.
And I think also a lot of us as adults forget how traumatic it is for a small child to have emotional trauma with an adult. Like, imagine if there was somebody 2 times your size and yelling at you. Right now, we're like, oh, well, they yelled. But no, this is, especially also if it's a primary caregiver, like someone who should keep you safe, that can be very traumatic for a small child. Even though as an adult, we can be like, oh, well, it wasn't that bad. It's endangering, especially when you're tiny. So yeah.
Yeah, and being yelled at once or twice is not going to cause this.
Yeah.
It's repeated experiences that create an environment in which the child doesn't have a sense of safety, or ability to integrate different feelings or experiences that they've had. And it's not uncommon for these kids to also have other traumatic experiences, but other traumatic experiences aren't absolutely necessary to develop D.I.D or a dissociative disorder, but it's not uncommon.
Now, somebody says, what about medical or hospital trauma as a child?
Absolutely.
Especially if it's, like you said, repeated, so more than one, and like you can't get out physically, so your brain is like, I will make us an out.
Yes, absolutely. So dissociation is a natural and healthy and good trauma survival skill that anybody can do. But when it becomes a disorder, or when it becomes not helpful, is when the person has to dissociate over and over and over again, and they don't have the safety or the resources to integrate the experience. So let's say a child was burned really badly or had to go in for medical procedures and couldn't be held by their primary caretaker, which we need to be held and loved on when we're young. If they have an experience like that, the body is going to have to dissociate in order to survive it, because children don't have their fight or flight abilities built up like adults do. And if you have a burn or something like that, you can't run away from a burn, or you can't fight a burn. The only way your body can survive that is to try to not feel it. And that's what dissociation does for us. It saves us when there's no other way to be saved. It's just problematic when it becomes automated and we can't control that response, and it's just happening. Like the example I gave yesterday was when we're just trying to go to the grocery store and live our life. It's just not needed anymore like that. And so then we have to learn ways to get back into the body and to feel present.
I think that's a really, really good explanation. And one thing that I want to throw in there as well is and you can correct me if I'm understanding wrong, but one of the things that also needs to be in place for it to become a dissociative disorder is a insecure attachment with primary caregivers. If I remember right, they said or disordered attachment style with primary caregivers, so that's not a safe place option for the child.
That's actually not true.
Oh, excellent. So
it's not uncommon. It would be very common, but it's not untrue, or it's not entirely true. And so we've got to think about, like, there may be one parent that's safe and another parent that's not safe, or if we have a child that was adopted out of foster care or something like that, maybe they have a good secure attachment with their foster parents, but the primary, like when they were young, or it's not uncommon for there to be like dissociative concerns for children that were like internationally adopted.
Yeah.
And they were adopted like really young even, but their very, very, very early childhood experiences as an infant were not secure. Or let's take the example of like with medical trauma. Maybe you are securely attached to your parents, but you had a severe burn, and you had to go in for a repeated medical treatment, and it was painful, and you didn't get to be with your family. Like, maybe maybe it was a single parent household and they couldn't afford to be at the hospital all the time. Then that can be enough to cause this automated response. So every person is unique in how they came to have these experiences, but yeah, it can be caused by, definitely insecure attachment can be a big root of this. Heidia said that I feel that my dissociation experiences got a lot worse since I got into a very toxic relationship. Yes, if your environment is not safe emotionally or physically, then if that is something that you learned as a survival mechanism earlier in your life, then if you're practicing it now, then it's just reinforcing it. And so we want to make sure that you can be in a safe environment, and just getting into a safer environment will help these experiences go down.
I know a lot of people also seem to, when they're beginning to learn about their system, experience an uptick in dissociative symptoms as well. And like, for me, I usually say, well, it's because the system was like in hiding for so long, and all the stuff that got pushed down, that was suppressed, suddenly got unlocked. And so now all of these experiences, it's not like you're worse now, it's that it can finally be expressed.
Yeah, or we talked yesterday about amnesia for amnesia, right?
Yes.
And so amnesia for amnesia is this term that we have in the mental health fields, where you have these symptoms of amnesia, but you forget that you have them. And so people can also have amnesia for their dissociative symptoms. And as you get into therapy and you start to develop this ability to notice what your experiences are and to check in and reflect, then you're like, oh, damn, I'm doing this a lot more than I thought I was. Yeah. And then that can get overwhelming. And then it's also not uncommon for people that have dissociative disorders to not think that they're hearing voices, and then they realize that they're hearing voices, or those voices are more like a chatter, or it's like a crowded bar inside the head.
Yes.
And as you grow your ability to check in and communicate with the parts, and the parts begin to get like a taste for being heard, then it can get really loud and overwhelming, and it can create a lot of anxiety for the person because it's all very new and it's a whole bunch at once.
Yeah, it definitely gets very loud. It especially at first, in my experience. Oh, and I just totally lost my thread. I was like, oh, and then whatever. But somebody else said where you were like as they're becoming aware that they're doing this, someone else was like, I've just become aware that I'm checked out more than I'm checked in.
Yeah.
And it's drawing that attention into the symptoms.
Yeah. And that's a big reason for making these cards, so that you could reflect at the end of the day. Or like when I had a teenager, they could go through the cards with their parent, and the parent could be aware of what the child's experiencing. And if the parent is inadvertently triggering these responses, and how to ground and bring the kid back to the present. I can't offer counseling in England because I'm not licensed in England, but I will post a really great website where you can click to find a therapist, and maybe you can find a therapist that would be a good match.
And somebody asks, how can we add these cards into therapy? And they're a system, so they're asking from the client perspective.
So if your therapist doesn't understand these dissociative symptoms, then the first thing would be to show them and explain to them, and they need to be willing to learn and develop their skills to become competent and savvy in working with dissociative disorders, and working with the whole system and not just the host. But you could take them with you, and if you begin to experience dissociative symptoms in the moment, then you can show your therapist what you're experiencing in that moment, and the therapist can help you to ground. Or you can reflect on your week and what symptoms were coming up for you that were causing you difficulty. You could explore the symptoms together and start to notice and track what triggers those symptoms. I'm sure there's lots of different ways that you could be creative with it. Jenna, what do you like to do, if you don't mind sharing?
Oh my word. So for me, I find it really helpful for, like I was saying earlier, like in an emotion wheel, but with dissociation. I find it really helpful to go through and that was what I was going to say earlier when I lost my train of thought. To recognize the dissociative symptoms, and then I can say, oh, I was feeling that one, for like the amnesia for the symptom. By looking at the cards, it helps me to remember, oh yeah, I experienced that at this point. So I find it really good for communicating to others or to self the experience that's going on. And what I was going to say is, when you were talking about the hearing of voices that some people don't realize that they're hearing, for me, one of the things that I've talked a lot about with people online is, like, because we don't talk about our inner mental, like, dialogue, like, I didn't realize that other people didn't just have like a random voice insert a comment onto their day, because we don't talk about that. Like, I'm like, what do I want to do? And then have a voice go, oh, what we want to do is this. Oh, then I guess what I want to do is that. Like, I didn't realize that that was a dissociative part communicating with me.
Yeah, it's so fun when clients have those experiences, because they don't think that they're hearing voices necessarily, but they think that it's just like their thought system.
Yes.
Like that everyone's thoughts come in different voices. Or the other way is that it sounds like them, but maybe like a mad version of them.
Yes. like
And
me,
so,
the me.
yeah,
Yeah.
or like a young version of them. And so then I have to help the way I differentiate for my clients is that, do you feel as if you have control over this thought or over this voice or this version of yourself? Or does it feel separated from you in some way? Because we all have like an internal dialogue. Like I have my own voice inside of me, my inner voice, but it is mine and I have control over it, and I don't feel separated from it.
Right.
And that's where dissociative conditions differ.
Yeah, it feels like this is me as an opposed to this is not me.
So Donna System asks, what does she think of the correlation of dissociation and intrusive thoughts? Okay, so there's another way that clients get confused, where they think that they have anxiety, and they do have anxiety, but they think that they have anxiety and they're experiencing just intrusive thoughts. But I always like to administer a specific screening measure that helps me to ask my clients about a variety of dissociative symptoms. And so when a client begins to report that they're having lots of different dissociative symptoms and they're having intrusive thoughts, then we begin to explore the intrusive thoughts and explore if they feel separate from the person or if they feel like they have no control over these intrusive thoughts, or do they begin to feel different levels of derealization or depersonalization with those intrusive thoughts. Then that may be like indicative that it's a dissociative part of the personality versus a person that does not have dissociation of the personality and is just having intrusive thoughts.
Yeah.
Because I have intrusive thoughts, like I have anxiety, but those are my intrusive thoughts. I have ownership of them. I don't feel separated from them or like they're coming from some other entity within me. I don't like them, but I have ownership of them.
Yeah, I had intrusive thoughts and I have parts, and they're definitely a different experience. For instance, I was able to retrain my, my inner dialogue or my inner monologue for the intrusive thoughts, and it took a lot of time and effort to retrain that critical voice in my head. But that was my like, oh, I can never do anything right. Oh, I messed up again. Versus when I had an alter who was angry that I was messing things up. That was a very different experience. So from having both, they are distinct, and you can be experiencing like one or the other or both. Yeah.
Yeah, and a big way for me to differentiate those with clients is if you're also experiencing other dissociative symptoms with that intrusive thoughts, like the derealization, depersonalization, feeling floaty, feeling as if you're getting sucked into the back. There's a co-pilot with you, like those types of things. I can't practice in Canada either. Unfortunately, I'm only licensed in Texas, which is where I'm from. But you can go to the ISSTD website or to emdrio.org and click on the Find a Provider or Find a Therapist button and find somebody that is licensed and has experience treating dissociative disorders. And hopefully you can find somebody, or if they're full, you can say, do you know anybody else? Because there's not a lot of people listed on issd.org. But you just want to make sure that they know what they're doing.
And I will absolutely, we talked about this yesterday, second that the care you can get from somebody who works with dissociative disorders or specializes in dissociative disorders is much, much more directed. Like, I had good care and I was healing and improving, but when I got with someone who specialized in dissociative disorders, it was so much better. So if you can find that, that is worth driving the extra bit for, doing telehealth or whatever, to be able to be with somebody who has experience, because it is different than just treating trauma.
Yeah. I want to answer D.I.D System's question real quick, and then I want to go to Blissfully Unfettered. Yes, it could be enough experience that the person has only treated one patient with D.I.D. On the ISSTD website, at the very bottom, there is a list of treatment guidelines for treating adults with dissociative disorders. It's like 80 pages long. I would ask your therapist if they would be willing to read that. I would inquire if your therapist has consultation that they seek, and or if they would be willing to seek consultation. And then I would ask, like, what course of treatment did they follow with their other patient? How far did they get along with them? It's issd.org. I'll type it here. That stands for the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation. And they have treatment guidelines for clinicians to, like, abide by good guidelines for treating. You know, we don't try to get rid of parts. We don't try to ignore them, things like that.
Or say you can't possibly have this disorder.
Huh?
A lot of people whose therapists don't specialize will be like, my therapist said this isn't a real disorder, so you can't have this disorder. Like, you're not going to run into that.
Yeah, please don't get one of those therapists. That's not true at all. Unfortunately, we're taught in our graduate programs a lot of the times that dissociative disorders are rare. And I will humble myself for a moment and tell you that the first time I ever had a client that I realized had a dissociative disorder, I thought I was working with like a unicorn. And I feel like a complete ass now. And I had known this kid, I'd known this young adult since they were like 17 years old. And I was like, okay, well, we'll just help get rid of these voices. Oh my God. I was like, so wrong. And I got with a consultant, and my consultant was like, no, we don't do that. And you need to wipe off that magical look on your face, because, you know, you're looking like you're too excited right now. And it was just because I was told in my graduate program that I may work with one person in my 30-year career that has a dissociative disorder. And like, my graduate program couldn't have been more wrong. I have like 7 people on my caseload that have dissociative disorders right now as I speak. So it's not rare. And when you specialize in complex trauma, then you get a lot of that. So.
And someone Blissfully Unfettered brought up one that we actually have a card for. So here's a symbolic one, because you said, do you feel like you're in the back of a car with no control? Says, I feel as if I'm in the back of my head and I can't control my body or my actions. And then the one that's more direct, so might be triggering for some people, because this
if it's triggering, just look away, please.
Yeah, it will only be up there a moment. There you go. That is really how it feels. So yeah, that is absolutely one of the the Dissociative Experiences.
That's actually the first card that we made together, the artist and myself.
Yeah, I mean, because that's, I have a friend, and I find that like you're drawn to people who are on the same wavelength, and we don't like, we're not close anymore, but they wrote a book in which the person didn't have control over like parts of their body occasionally. And now that I know about my dissociation, I want to be like, so, you know, when I wrote a book, there was all kinds of like self-exploration going on that I wasn't ready for. Knowing you and your history, this might also be a thing for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we had another one. Oh, yes. Okay. So how do you begin to get to know your alters and what roles they have? Dr. Black's actually working on a journal that could be really helpful for that. So yeah, I was just telling you, like, there's like, that would be really helpful just to have a map of like, okay, you can, here are questions you can ask, things you can find out about them, like just to know where to begin.
So on the Phoenix Arise shop under Etsy, there is a parts profile download that's $3 or $2.99, whatever. And Gina has Jenna, is it Jenna?
Jenna.
I apologize, Jenna.
But it's the D.D.N.O. system. So
right.
Yes.
So Jenna's got a code. Maybe you can put it in the chat. It won't save you very much on the $2.99. It's for 10% off. But you can begin to track and to write down the different parts. Right now on Amazon, there are some great journals that are for people that have dissociation. But I'm also in the process of creating a journal. And maybe we can, when you get your copy, we can do another video on it. But I'll be going through and doing some final edits on it, and it'll be available for purchase in the next couple of weeks. And Pat loves, I will drop the link to the Etsy website for you.
Yes. Absolutely. And you're welcome. And yes, thank you so much. This is just excellent. You were talking about, you know, doing this as a therapist and not someone who has lived experience. For me, I educate as someone who has lived experience. My little tagline is like educating through telling our stories, but not being someone who is a therapist. Like, there's only so far my research and my lived experience will take me, and like, so a lot of times I'm like, well, this is my experience. Like, that's what I can give. So I really appreciate you coming on here and bringing your expertise to pair with that experience. Like, it's invaluable.
Thank you. It's fun. It's cool.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So they Grizz, I am creating this journal, and it's going to be something that you can purchase, like a tangible paperback. It's going to be an 8.5 by 11, like full-size journal, and there's going to be space in it. I was actually just showing Jenna what it looks like right before we did the TikTok live, and there's going to be an introduction portion where it tells you about the different sections, how you can use them, like if you're new to working with your system or to journaling with dissociation and things like that. And it's semi-structured, and it's got a semi-therapeutic feel to it. So there are places in the journal to track parts and what the parts do for the system, which parts they align with. if they have different coping skills, if they have needs from you, that they can, write those things down. And then there's a space to do system maps. So you can draw like internal landscapes, or you can draw a meeting place for the parts to get together and have conversations, to make decisions. There's a place to track triggers. There's a place to track like daily symptoms or goals or things like that. And then there's like space to free journal, whatever. Hopefully it'll meet a lot of needs for whatever the person needs. And so the download that's on Etsy is a piece of what will be in the journal. But if you want to download it from Etsy, it's $2.99, and you can do that now if you wanted to, or hopefully the journal will be ready for purchase by the end of the month. And I think I will figure out a way to put it on the Etsy shop.
Definitely. I'm excited about it. So, you all will be seeing it on TikTok. I'm certain. You could just expect it.
So Gris said, I'm not sure if I'm a system, but I definitely have dissociation. And oh, my therapist is doing IFS with me. Okay, so we were just talking about IFS earlier. And as a therapist myself, I'm familiar with IFS, but I don't ascribe to everything that they believe, like everything that it's about, because IFS talks about those that have dissociation or like dissociative disorders as being treated in therapy the same as people that don't have dissociative disorders. And I don't agree with that. So IFS stands for Internal Family Systems, and it's a theory, a counseling theory that says that we are all multiple and that we all have parts of ourselves. And I agree to that. But I think that people that have dissociative disorders, they have different experiences because the parts of the system are dissociated, and there is a degree of separation and amnesia potentially, or dissociation around those parts that make it entirely different than me talking about the part of me that gets angry, or the part of me that, my inner critic. My inner critic is very, very, very different than speaking about a person that has D.I.D, that has an inner critic that feels different and separate, and maybe can take over executive control over the body and harm the body, or say very hateful, mean things. That's different than me just beating myself up for making mistakes. Right?
Very different. Well, and a lot of people, when you explaining D.I.D, go, oh, well, yeah, everybody has that a little, because like work me is different from home me. And I'm like, well, like, but does work you like take over and do stuff that like home you is actively trying to prevent work you from doing?
Yeah.
Because yes, you do have like different parts, but for you it's all within one unified stream of consciousness. Whereas for someone with a dissociative disorder, like you said, like it does not feel like this is me, and it can take over and disrupt what the me I associate with wants and identifies with.
Yeah, so imagine like I have I have a lobby inside of my head, and all of the parts of me, my angry side, my sensitive side, my inner child, or, whatever, the carefree side of me, they're all in the lobby together, intermingling. A person with a dissociative disorder may have a couple of parts in the lobby, but they also have parts that are in different rooms. And some of those parts can have closed doors, with brick walls, or with wood walls, or glass walls. And there's different degrees of separation and dissociation between the parts. And it's vastly different than a person that has all of their parts hanging out, intermingling in the lobby. And so this may be like explaining these dissociative experiences may help the therapist to understand that this is not just figurative parts where you're talking about an aspect of yourself. You're literally talking about dissociative parts of the personality, and it needs a different approach to being worked with in therapy.
I've had people ask, like, they said, well, in doing IFS, can I make this work? Can I develop alters if I didn't already have them? And I'm like, no. Like, if you're doing IFS and discover you have alters, they were already there. Like, you didn't create this, because it's a very different experience having the internal parts that I do think everybody has, versus having the dissociative parts and the dissociative disorder. So you might find through exploration, you might find them that way, but you're not creating them.
Yeah. And I've done IFS based therapy myself. And I know when the angry part of myself gets activated around certain people. And it's like, my hype man in my head, just come on, let's tell them off. You can just destroy them. And I'm like, okay, Nicole, don't take that route. Be professional. It's not worth it. There is this higher ability to overcome that. But that is explicitly different than feeling dissociative, feeling floaty, feeling like in the back of my head, feeling as if I don't have control over my body, feeling as if another part is taking over control of my body and is beginning to talk. That's different. If I start running my mouth, it's because I, Nicole, chose to run my mouth.
Not the speaker where words are coming out of your mouth, but you have no clue where these words are coming from.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for systems discovering their inner world?
Yeah, so sometimes it can be really overwhelming or scary to explore the inner world. And so you may start with a part that you feel less anxious about interacting with or less scared to interact with, and you can journal. You can write back and forth with these parts, or you can create kind of like a meeting place in your mind, just like a nice, comfortable, neutral place where the parts can come and discuss things. And if it's overwhelming, just start with one part, and then, or a few parts that are a little bit easier to work with. And then you can work up your way to adding other parts. This is really where it's really great to have a therapist, because when I work with my clients in therapy, I always like to pick the biggest, baddest, meanest part, and I start working with that part first. And I help the client, or the host rather, to not be afraid. I model that I'm not afraid, and I model how to be curious and empathetic, and how to work on developing communication and cooperation. Because what we're trying to hopefully achieve is becoming the dream team. And so when you're in, because I'm the therapist and I'm helping my client, I can go for the biggest, baddest part, the meanest and scariest. But maybe if you don't have a therapist, that's not the right path. Maybe start with a part that's a little bit more comfortable to start with.
Yeah, and I absolutely, one of the things I tell new systems when they are asking me, for advice or what to expect, I tell them to expect the alter that they think is bad or evil, and is the big bad. And I'm like, look, you don't have any like evil part. What you have is the most wounded part with the worst coping mechanism. But they still were there and they still kept you alive, and they're doing what they think is right. They just need healing more than anybody else. And so I agree. Like that's what I'm like. You want that part in therapy. They're the one who needs that the most. And when they heal, they are like the most amazing in the system.
Yeah.
Experiencing the people that I talk to, like they become like the heroes of the system, really.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And the parts that are mean to other parts on the inside, or the parts that are critical of the host, or the parts that are that get bristled up and defensive or mean with other people, they're typically trying to protect in the best way that they know how to. And so we can appreciate what they're trying to do for the system. They're trying to protect the system and to keep everything safe. And yeah, they'll be your ride or die when it's all said and done. And they are strong parts that are highly useful in the system. They just are a little misguided in their attempts.
Absolutely. And I do need to wrap it up soon, but I loved this question. How do you suggest we approach a therapist if we suspect we have a dissociative disorder? And I just want to point out that they're using plural. I was talking to someone and they were like, I don't know if I have a dissociative disorder, but sometimes and I was like, most of the people I know who don't randomly sprinkle in plural pronouns into their general conversations. So how do they bring this up with the therapist?
I would start to talk about some of your experiences, and you may, if you do have the cards, you can bring those into therapy and explain. But you're going to want to make sure that your therapist is willing to learn, and I don't mean just wing it. It's not enough to just wing it, or like you just can't half-ass therapy with somebody that has a dissociative disorder. And they need to be willing to work with all of the parts. They can't just try to ignore the voices or the parts. That will not work. And so I would be curious if they would be willing to further their education, to get consultation with another therapist. But I would just start to explain some of your symptoms and say, have you ever worked with anyone that's felt like this before? Or have you ever worked with people that have dissociation? What do you think of dissociation? Or and if they tell you that they think that dissociative disorders are made by the therapist, then please pack your bags and get a different therapist, because that's not true at all. Dissociative disorders are created from experiences when the person is a child. So
We've got two really good ones in there. What would you do if only one part is struggling with depression?
So one part may be struggling with depression, but then I become curious if there's other parts that are struggling with acknowledging depression and acknowledging the things that this other part is struggling with, or if maybe the other parts are just trying to ignore or compartmentalize that. And then that would be something to work with this part of like, what is causing them to feel depressed? Are there coping skills? Are there resources that this part needs? Is there traumatic material that this part needs to work through in the future? Things like that. Casey Jones asked, is it possible to have multiple people, but if you like the people, can it be okay just to keep? Yes. We would call that functional multiplicity. And oftentimes that is what a person that comes to therapy with D.I.D. maybe wants to be their therapeutic goal at the end. That's totally fine. That would be a conversation to have with a therapist about, like, what are the obstacles? Like, do you need to have amnesia if you're all getting along inside? Maybe, why are you having amnesia? Can we work past that? Or is there traumatic material that is keeping two parts from being co-present and keeping up that amnesia?
Yes.
So.
Yeah. And I love, like, I try and tell people all the time, because they're like, so are you going to become one person? And I'm like, well, healing can look that way, but it doesn't have to look like that. You can all work together and have a really functional life. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it could take a long time, and it could be costly to achieve what a person might call full integration into one unified part or entity. And so maybe not everyone has the resources and the time for that. And everyone's journey is going to be different. And it's just going to be something to have a conversation with the therapist.
If you don't have a therapist and you're looking, this is one of the things that I emailed when I was saying, looking for a therapist. I was like, I have a dissociative disorder. What would your treatment plan be if I came to see you? Because that was very important, that the therapist was fine, like with healing being a treatment plan, with working through things like amnesia and the things that make day-to-day life easier. Oh yes, systemspeak.org. That is an excellent resource.
Do you know System Speaks? Do you know Emma?
I haven't met them personally, but I've seen their stuff a few times.
I love Emma. So Emma actually is a therapist that has lived experience, and she goes by an alias of Emma Sunshaw, and she has a brilliant podcast. And she, on her website, they've also got something called The Community, which may be something good for people to check out, where it's like a social platform for people that have multiplicity of different kinds. And then there is also, under the resources tab, there is a list of potential resources and therapists, and it's categorized by country and states. I did not think about this earlier when someone asked about England and Canada, but it's there, and I would totally recommend that y'all go check it out. Do you want to do one last one?
Yep, one last one, and then I gotta get off. I've got to get up in the morning, guys.
Yes, I feel you. Any comments on differences of D.I.D. and autistic and non-autistic systems? So it's tricky. I have worked with people that have DID and that would meet criteria for autism spectrum disorder. There can be overlap, and the DID can be mistaken for autism spectrum disorder because people that have DID can have really blunted or flat affect, and they're checked out a lot of the times, and they may have a hard time registering emotion and things like that. And so it can be confused for autism spectrum. And then as they begin to work with the system, and they begin to work with feelings and becoming more present and aware, then a lot of those symptoms soften up, but they may not entirely go away. And there can be, you know, connection and links between early childhood trauma and the brain not getting enough experience with contact and social connection with caretakers. And so then that early childhood trauma looks like autism. And it may be autism. I can't speak to that with authority because that's not my area of specialty, but it's just those people really struggle with affective expression and regulation skills.
I actually had somebody very gently suggest to me that I might be on the spectrum, someone who was on the spectrum. And so I did a lot of digging and looking, and I was like, you know, I think what I have is a lot of trauma, just a lot.
Yeah.
And it really does influence the way you interact with the world.
Yeah, I wouldn't think that you would be on the spectrum at all.
Yeah. No, it's just that when the trauma responses kick in, it really can look similar, but you can have both, and you can be a system without it.
All right. Well, thank you for having me again.
Absolutely. This was fantastic, and just an absolute pleasure.
All right. Y'all take care. And if y'all have any questions, I would imagine we can do this again sometime, and just reach out to me if you have any questions about the cards. I'll post my website address again before I hop off.
And the website address and your TikTok handle, so y'all can start following her so she can.
Oh yeah, oh wait, that's System Speaks. Let me hold on. We were talking about going over products and talking about some useful tips and things like that. So
on her TikTok.
My TikTok. Yeah, hit that follow button.
Good resources coming. All right. Thank you again so much.
Take care. Have a good night.
Bye.